I'm just going to connect back to that pedagogic shift that I spoke about during Results Plus 3 with you. So essentially in this next few minutes, hopefully just between 5 and 10 minutes, we'll look at the connection between the pedagogic shift and intervention, and bringing in that really important element that Martin spoke about this morning, particularly for South Australian students, that self-efficacy element. So I'm aware that some of you weren't here last time, so I'm about to do a connection to something that some of you weren't here for. So I'm going to do this is 2 minutes of me trying to bring anyone who wasn't here into this story, and if you were here, this just adds another example, hopefully, to your kind of repertoire of what we're talking about when we're talking about our new model of pedagogy, the new dominant model of pedagogy that we want. So in a minute, I'm going to show you a video. It's a 20-second video. It's got no sound to it. You've just got to follow what the guy's doing. This is actually Dan Meyer. If it was with kids, I would say to them, I'm going to show you a video, and I just want to know what questions you've got. But if it was with kids, I would have an hour, and I'm with you, and I've got 5 minutes. So I'm going to cut to the chase and direct you towards the question. So the question that I have for you is, would you get the same amount of popcorn? So essentially, you've got 3 responses you could possibly make. The one on the left, you'd get more popcorn. I think it's the same. It's the same piece of A4 paper he starts off with, and he's just curved it around in a different way. Or I reckon you get more popcorn by doing the one on the right. Okay, so make your choice. Again, I'd give kids more time, but step up to it. Make your choice. You've got 3 choices. Who reckons this one over here is going to get you more popcorn? A few. Who reckons it's the same bit of paper, you've just folded it 2 different ways, I'm going to get the same amount of popcorn? That's lots of you have gone for that one, and who reckons this one, this way around, is going to get you more popcorn? No one, really? Okay, that's unusual, but that's okay. So we've got different opinions in the room, and I suspect we've got some for that opinion as well, but they're just not prepared to put the hand up, so there's maybe 1 or 2 people. So that particular task in a classroom could be happening from junior primary through to about year 10. So from around about year 2 to 10, depending on how you respond to it then as the teacher. So you have just entered a maths problem that could be expanded from levels from year 2 through to year 10 with your opinion. And of course, if it was in the classroom, or indeed if I had more time with you, I'd say to you, go find somebody who had a different answer to you and start arguing with them about why you believe the thing that you believe and why they believe the thing that they believe. So you've entered a maths activity with an opinion, and your reasoning is all about your opinion. That's the type of activity that we're talking about when we're talking about an activity with a low floor for entry. The fact that that can be taken through to maths described in the Year 10 maths curriculum is a high exit point for that particular activity. And that's what we were talking about in that pedagogic shift. Our aspired to dominant pedagogy that we want to move towards is one in which there's a low floor for entry, there's a high ceiling for exit, and our kids can enter those types of activities with their opinion by making a judgment. So our current dominant pedagogy, of course, last time we spoke about this shift through the example of, through a parallelograms example. And our current dominant pedagogy, that one that we can think of as being sort of textbook driven, but isn't necessarily, remember, where kids are told stuff, shown why things work, and basically asked to use information. We want to move that to this low floor, high ceiling pedagogic space where kids are making comparisons, they're convincing each other, they're engaged in transfer of content, understanding. So in the parallelograms example, we talked about transferring what you know about a rectangle to what you could hypothesize about a parallelogram. And then ultimately, our kids are involved in making generalisations for themselves, rather than being told the generalisation at the beginning, at the outset of the lesson, as they are in the old model. So, how do those models relate to intervention? Let's just hook into our minds what that will look like as leaders as we pass through classrooms in our schools. So that old model of pedagogy that we know is prevalent in South Australia, we know this through the TEFL research, we know it through lots and lots of other research. That old model of pedagogy primarily looks like teaching to the middle. And then, of course, when intervention does need to happen in that model of pedagogy, we know what that looks like and feels like. If you've been in the classroom recently, you know that feels frantic. That feels like lots of worksheets. So in the case of that area example, that's maybe 4 different worksheets for the 4 different levels that the kids are at on working with area. So that's different groups working on different stuff where they can't have conversations and the teacher's frantic, as well as working hard, doing multiple preparations. And that's if they're teaching a single year level. And I know that lots of you are leading schools where teachers have got that, times 3 year levels. And of course, in that model, what we tend to see is some of the kids get to those questions that we talk about as being the harder questions. Classically, they're the questions that involve problem solving and reasoning. So there's this kind of filter mechanism about not all of the students are getting access to the problem solving and reasoning in that model. Whereas in the model that I know this is the model you're trying to lead the shift of, the activities that are being designed to be taken to the classroom are low floor, high ceiling activities. So that's by comparison to that teaching to the middle, the worksheet teaching to the middle. By comparison to there being different groups on different things and there not being able to be this kind of fluid conversation. We've got peer teaching and collaboration can happen because our stronger kids or our kids who've hooked into that particular problem, which the kids sometimes who will hook into a particular problem, like that popcorn problem that I've just shared with you, are not necessarily kids who you would have put in the strongest group. But on that particular day, for that particular problem, they've hooked into it so they can step up and be a leader and a peer tutor in that space. And the teacher's not had to pre-think that, pre-know what the student's reaction to that particular task was going to be. And then, of course, because the problem solving and the reasoning starts right at the beginning of the activity with, what do you think? Why do you think that? Everyone is accessing problem solving and reasoning. So the intervention there, intervening to give all of our students access to problem solving and reasoning, has happened by the design of the activity and then the teacher's responsiveness as the students work through that activity. Let's just take that same kind of pair of examples now and think about how that might connect to self-efficacy. Last time I asked you, after we'd gone through the 2 examples, the old pedagogy, the new pedagogy that we aspire to, what the effect might be on mindset. The mindset of students who've got access to this diet of told, shown and use, where they are positioned as receivers of information, compared to the kids who are comparing, contrasting, convincing each other, making generalizations and so on. They're constructing understanding. And you said you could see how the mindset of the students in that new model was more likely to be one of a growth mindset. Because not only are we using the language of mindset, that is really important to establish with students. They need to know the kind of basics of that research. They should have access to that, I think. But if we don't put it into practice through their lived experience in the maths classroom, they're unlikely to sustain, to really appreciate what that growth mindset is. So in terms of our students' self-efficacy, that pedagogic shift that we're looking for, that model that we spoke about last time, we would imagine, support our students to develop a better self-efficacy. It's obviously an issue we need to deal with, particularly in South Australia. So those principles that we've captured in the form of transforming tasks that I pointed out last time in the pedagogic shift, how it was these principles that we used to design that new model, that new example in the parallelograms example. These principles are principles for intervention. These are principles for the learning design for all of our learners. So when we hold ourselves in that space of thinking about intervention, not just as what do we do to support our weakest students, but when we hold ourselves in that space of let's get wave 1 as right as we can possibly get it, so that wave 2 and wave 3 become less of a thing for us over time. Wave 1 is going to help us to address those two dark red squares that Martin was looking at in terms of the self-efficacy. Our third and fourth quartile students, our highest SES students. They would be people often who are achieving well and are not coming into our wave 3 intervention. But that's growth that we can get if we focus on wave 1 intervention in the way that we've spoken about it in the pedagogic shift. So that's enough from me about connecting to the pedagogic shift. I'm going to ask you to process that now through an interview process, a structured interview process similar to we used last time. So for those of you, hopefully most of you were here last time, and so you're on tables of 8, I think, again. So if we could ask you to split into 2 groups of 4 within your tables of 8, and you're going to label off A, B, C, D as in your group of 4, and then we'll give you prompts to change over your interview process. So A is going to interview B, C is going to record, B interviews C, A records, C interviews A, B records, and D plays a really important role, and this was so beneficial for us getting information from you last time. D is looking for what's being said in each of the groups on the table that are functioning and looking for common patterns of what's being said. And the questions to guide your interview process are thinking about that definition of intervention. Is intervention perceived this way in your partnership? What's the same and different? What would stay, stop, start if you took on the kinds of things that we've been speaking about this morning and the kinds of innovation that's already started to happen in your partnership? And then how might you go back and influence so that this view of intervention for all, is established in your partnership through this role that you're leading? So I'll give you a minute or so to organise yourselves into A, B, C, D, your 2 groups of 4, and then we'll start with, I think, rounds of about 4 minutes of interview will work. So label A, B, C, D. In a moment, I'll keep those questions on the screen for you. If A can get ready to interview B, if C can get ready to record, and if D can prime themselves to be looking at what everyone's saying and picking patterns, we'll make a start in a minute or so. Okay, so I reckon that's enough organisation time. So A, using those questions as guiding questions, but feel free to kind of elaborate on them and challenge what you're hearing. Person A, if you can start interviewing person B now about your thoughts about intervention in your partnership. See if you can get ready to record. Your time starts now, A and B. If you can finish your interview with B, and B, you are now interviewing C. So your time for B to interview C starts now. A, if you can record on the same piece of paper, that would be useful. So if you're still managing to follow the protocols of your interview process so that everyone's got a voice in this, C, it's now time for you to interview A. So person C, if you can interview person A. Let's try and ensure everybody gets a voice in this one. Okay, if you could conclude your interview process now, please. And in a moment, if the person who has been making recordings for your group, if you've managed to record on one piece of paper, or even if you've got a few of them, if you could bring them up to the front for us, or maybe just make a copy of some of the key elements that's come out of your conversation, and just bring them up and pop them on the corner of the stage, we'll process that for you so that you've got a kind of summary of the picture of what's going on, what our thinking is in relation to intervention in our partnerships. In terms of, you might remember at Results Plus Part 3, we did this same interview process in relation to Garth Boomer's litmus test. And you gave us your information from that interview. We actually had 20 pages of notes about your opinion about that particular, about Garth's litmus test, the fact that it's still relevant and why haven't we moved on. We've condensed that into just a one-page summary that there should be about 4 copies on each of your tables. If anyone wants another copy of that, just send me an email and I'll send you an electronic version. There's a summary of that interview process that I hope you find helpful. It was your advice to each other as leaders that really came through that interview process. So if you will, please hand in your thoughts from this interview process.